In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the chassis on the iPhone 13 Pro. In the past, I've done a lot of videos replacing only the glass. However, recently on these newer models, so this generally goes for the iPhone 12 and onwards, the glass is much thinner and the aftermarket glass has been of a substandard to the point that we have ceased offering that repair in store. So instead, we get hold of these A/B grade chassis that come with all the small parts already attached. You can see they've got a few fingerprints on them. They come in at a very affordable price. We let all customers know that this is what they're getting, and technically it's a genuine Apple part, although I don't know if you're allowed to legally say that, believe it or not. Let's get on with the repair. Start off by removing the 2 pentalobe screws at the very bottom of the device. Store those screws safely for later. I would recommend using a magnetic mat like this one because there is a lot of screws to remove during this replacement or repair, whatever you want to call it. And I recommend laying them out on the mat the way that they are removed. I'm not having a very good day today and my heat mat is broken, so I'm going to show you how to remove the screen of an iPhone 13 Pro without using a heat mat. This could all go horribly wrong. You're going to get yourself a suction cup and attach it to the very bottom, and half a Dorco blade that looks something like this. And then you're going to insert that Dorco blade into the very bottom of the screen, in between the chassis and the screen, and you're going to make sure that it's pushed down nice and flat. We can then run a small bead of isopropyl alcohol down the back of that, and that's going to soak in underneath. And I'm lifting up with the suction cup and prying backwards with the Dorco blade. And what you're going to find is that this screen should eventually just pop out at the bottom, a little bit like that. A lot of people are very scared to remove these screens on these models. However, heat isn't always the best option, and alcohol will definitely help if you use the force in the right way. Now that we've sort of created that very small gap down the bottom, it should be wide enough to fit one of these blue plastic picks into. And we're going to slide it around the edges, creating a larger gap. I promise you, this phone hasn't already been opened. This is my old personal iPhone 13 Pro, and I never ever took the screen off it. Like I said, with alcohol, it makes it very easy. Anyway, let's carry on working our way around. Make sure that you don't insert the pick too far into the phone because you can risk damaging other things. And we're just going to run it along the edge, separating the screen until we get to the top half, where at this point I'm going to lift up from the bottom like that. I'm going to wiggle it a little bit from side to side to create a gap up here, and that gap should fit the pick in it a bit like that. And you're going to pry back, move along, pry back, and eventually it's going to sort of snap out of the clips there. Look how dirty this phone is. My wife's had it for the last year, so I blame her for all that. Anyway, this screen opens up like a book, just like that. That's probably the hardest bit out of the way. The second hardest bit is, like I said at the start, keeping these screws organized, which we're going to start off by removing the 3 tri-wing screws that hold down the shield just here. That's holding down the connector for the display and the battery, which is always the first thing that we disconnect when tearing down these phones. Get that shield out of the way, and then when you're disconnecting connectors, make sure that you use a plastic tool like a spudger just to pop that off and get it out of the way like that. We're going to do the same for this screen connector here. Lift that up, and then I'm going to just move up to the top of the phone here, where we've got another 2 tri-wing screws at the bottom of this shield. This screw here, 2 crosshead ones. This one's a little bit hidden up in this top, so go ahead and remove that. We're going to use the tweezers to lift the shield out of the way, and we'll just slide it out. Just be careful when you're pulling this out because you need to slide it down that way and then out. That means that we can now remove this flex cable just here. Let me go under like that to disconnect it. That means that the screen is now free and we can remove that and store it safely for reinstallation later, because this one's in relatively good condition apart from one small scratch up the top here. Now that we've got the screen away, we can have a look side by side with our new chassis and we can see what we need to transfer over. These even have a new seal on them, which is pretty cool. You got the battery, obviously, the camera. These usually have the LiDAR sensor on them. You need to swap that over. It's got the charging port already attached, obviously the motherboard, the ear speaker, front camera array, and that's it. These are a much simpler and quicker job than doing the back glass repairs. Moving on to the logic board now. I'm going to start off by removing these 2 screws for this other shield, and then use the tweezers to remove it. Now that that shield's out of the way, there's another 2 connectors underneath that. Use your plastic spudger. Mine's gone a bit blunt. We didn't find a replacement spudger, so we'll struggle on with this one. Removing these 2 connectors here. Peel that back, and then this one just here. Moving up to the top of the motherboard now, we've got the 2 connectors for the camera, and then underneath those 2, there's a connector for the LiDAR sensor, and then I don't remember what the other one does, but it needs to be lifted. We've got another few just up the top here for the front camera array, infrared camera, and then 3 more underneath those 2 for the ear speaker and a couple of like sensors and various bits and bobs that need to be removed. Apart from the screws now, that will release the logic board, which is the next thing that needs to come out. To get these screws out, these are standoff screws. You need to use a standoff screwdriver. You could use a slotted screwdriver, but they don't work quite as well as the specialist one. Go ahead and remove that one first. Then there should be one more up the top, just here. And then I believe I forgot to pop the SIM out, which I'll do with some tweezers. And that should release the logic board now. And we use the tweezers underneath it. Make sure that this little pin's pushed in. And then you should be able to just lift it out quite easily. A bit like that. I did forget to remove a connector, look, and luckily it's not come back to bite me. It's only the charging port. And you can either use your spudger to get it out, or you could have just twisted it out like that. But that's the motherboard removed now. Next up, we've got the ear speaker, and that is held down by 1 crosshead screw in the top of it. Because we've already removed that standoff screw, there's just 1 more standoff just in the bottom here. Before you take the ear speaker out, you need to remove this shield for the camera. That's held down by 3 tri-wing screws in the left corner of it, a crosshead screw up the very top here, and 1 more tri-wing screw in the very bottom right corner, which means that we can now lift this shield off. I'm going to leave the camera in place though. I'll explain that in a minute, because I'm going to take the ear speaker out now, which should lift up and slide out. And that should allow us now to remove the front camera and Face ID components just here. Next up, we've got the battery. This is going to be a bit of a challenge because, as I said at the beginning of the video, I don't have my heat mat in use today. We've got another one coming tomorrow after mine blew up. So I'm going to add some isopropyl alcohol, a good flooding of it in all honesty, all the way around the battery. The adhesive, in all honesty, is pretty poor once you've put some alcohol underneath it, and you can use a plastic pick just to lift it up slowly. Once the alcohol's soaked in underneath it, the adhesive's pretty garbage, so you can just get the pick under it very slowly and it slides out or peels up just like that. And I've not bent the battery doing that, just for your information there. It's pretty straight still. The reason I leave the camera in until the very last thing is because obviously it's very sensitive to dust getting onto the lenses inside it, so we need to take precautions to prevent that happening. First, I'm going to use the tweezers just to pry it out of the housing there. From there, it means I can just lift it up from the cables, and then it's a good idea to get something like a clean room wipe or put it in a plastic bag and just cover those lenses up before you pop it into the new housing. The reason I'm not going to stick it straight in is because underneath the camera there is this 1 more sensor, which is the LiDAR sensor. I don't believe that these will work if you use a new one. Just to mitigate that risk, we've removed the 3 screws holding it down, the shield with some tweezers, and then you can even use just the back of the tweezers just to shift it out and pry it out like that. And then that's it, that's removed. Same with this, they have got sensitive lenses on them, so keep them clean. I think that concludes how much we need to take out of this chassis. And the good news about doing this repair is that you can keep hold of this chassis. You can reuse the loudspeaker, the charging port, any bits and bobs up here are all reusable. If you felt that way inclined, you could technically go for a glass only replacement on the back, but for us, we just recycle them by using the parts, and then somebody will buy these damaged grade housings off us once we've got a decent collection of them. So now we'll get our new chassis. I'm going to just remove that SIM tray out of the way, and then we're going to focus in on that LiDAR sensor that I'm going to get rid of. So with that out of the way, let's go straight in to reassembly by dropping that where the old one came from, popping the shield back on, and then re-securing those 3 tri-wing screws that we removed. If you wanted to get hold of these used, just genuine parts like this, if you drop me an email, I've not got the facility at the moment to sort of sell these online, but if you need parts like this, just drop me a message and I will get back to you with a price as soon as I possibly can. I'll put my email in the description below as well. Now that that's secured down, we're going to go ahead and drop the camera in there. Just give it one last little blowout of dust before I do that. And then with this 13 Pro camera, I've got a feeling that I might have made a video in the past where I put the cable for it outside this little sort of gutter what sits there for it. I do apologise for that. Everybody was very quick to point it out, as usual. This time, make sure that it sits inside that little bit there, because we don't want to embarrass ourselves again like that, do we? Front camera and sensor array. Be careful with these parts, they're very sensitive. Same again, don't touch them. Don't touch that lens there, or that lens there. Do everything you can not to touch those bits. But with that in place, we've now got our ear speaker up the top. Drop that into place, right where it belongs. And then we can start screwing everything back together. Starting off with this crosshead screw just here. Then we'll go for this standoff screw just here. And then one more standoff screw just here. Next, we've got this little grounding bracket that goes on for that, on top of that ear speaker. Make sure that it goes the right way around. It only goes on one way, but you might just have to spin it until you get it right. And then there's a crosshead screw that sits in the top just here. Now let's go back to the camera area where we'll pop the shield on top. Drop that in place. And then we have got 3 tri-wing screws securing down on this side. One more little tri-wing screw just here. And then finally, crosshead one goes at the very top of the camera shield. This means that we can now reinstall the logic board. Just make sure that the flex cables have been sort of bent out of the way and they're not going to hinder you installing this board. And then we're going to slide the board under these connectors up here. It's a bit awkward. Sometimes you might find that you've put it in and you've trapped a connector underneath. Don't put pressure on this board until you're confident that all the connectors are safely out of the way and that it's secured down properly, like this one is. Then we can just start reconnecting all the connectors and then pushing them down to make sure that they're secured into place. Remember that this is a new housing, so things might not line up perfectly at first. You might have to make some little nudges and adjustments to the board or to the cables to make sure that they fit in. But if you take your time, you get all these secured in. I've got really big hands and thumbs, and it probably makes all these look really, really tiny and probably gets in the way. So I apologise if you can't see anything while I'm doing this, but it'd be a great time to have a look at that subscribe button and make sure that you subscribe to the channel if you can't see what I'm doing. What a great link. Now we've got the cameras, just making sure that everything's pushed down and nothing's popped out while I've been moving stuff around. There are a couple of standoff screws to go in, one just here, and the second one goes in the other side of, on the same side of the board, more towards the bottom. It's a good idea to make sure that the SIM tray fits now. Pop that in there. I think the only other thing that we needed to install apart from the screen and battery is this little shield here. The other thing I say about these housings is that I don't know how well they're tested before they ship out. Guessing by the price of them compared to ones that I know are tested, they have not been rigorously tested, in all honesty. Which is fine, but just be prepared that you might have to swap the charging port over, or you might have to move a speaker over. Just bear that in mind. Obviously, if you're buying from me, you're going to get these guarantees. But if you're buying them elsewhere, beware. Now for the battery, just use your thumb to rub off the adhesive on the back there. Get as much of that adhesive off as you possibly can, because that's going to help it sit flush. It'd be great if I had a heat player. It might be one of those moments where I click my fingers and the dirt is gone. And the dirt is gone. Wow, magic. So these parts come with a adhesive for the battery, as well as the SIM tray. And like I said, a pre-applied adhesive seal around the edges. This isn't just an ad for me selling these housings, by the way. This is just a guide on how to replace it. But I just know what the question that everyone's going to ask is, where do you get that part? So I'm trying to answer that in the video. Clean up that little bit of dust there. And then we're going to peel off the pink sheet of the battery adhesive. Whenever you stick these batteries down, just do yourself a favour. Put lots of pressure on it. Push it down. Wherever there's adhesive, just give it a good rubbing. A good rubbing. Because if you just stick it down, they don't secure very well. You can even squeeze it in with the back and just make sure that it's pushed down and pressed in. Because like I say, they come loose. So I'm just going to move that chassis out of the way because this screen is gunked up to hell. And I'm just going to use the edge of this metal brush just to clean off all that dirt and gunk that was left behind from when my wife has stuffed this in the bottom of her handbag. It's disgusting. Jodie, what are you doing? Just as a little side quest as well, I'm going to show you a little trick to cleaning out ear speakers when you've got the phone off. If you just drop some alcohol, only 1 or 2 drops, into that speaker mesh from the back and then blast it, it's going to go straight through and give it a real good cleaning out. You can use the wire brush a little bit. Don't go mad with the wire brush though, because there is a risk that you'll scratch the screen, although the screen glass is harder than this little steel brush or whatever it's made out of, so it shouldn't scratch it too bad. It'll definitely not do a lot of damage if you're only pressing it lightly. I'll use the little dust blower again to make sure that all the dust is gone, and then we're going to offer up the screen connector. Offer up this connector here. Now that everything is connected, we're going to offer up this shield here. And if you remember all the way back to the beginning of the video, it was 2 tri-wing screws at the bottom and then 2 crosshead screws holding down the top of that shield. The longer of the 2 that you took out goes in the top right, and then the other one is slightly shorter. Although they're both going into standoff screws, it's not the end of the world if you do mix them up a little bit. Now let's go back to the bottom where we can finally reconnect power. Pop this shield on here, and then we've got 3 more tri-wing screws that hold that down. And I believe these are all the same length, so don't worry if they've got a little bit mixed up. This would be a really good hold point if you wanted to test everything works. I'm going to skip that point. If something doesn't work, I'll just open it back up in a bit. But for the sake of the video, I'm going to show you how to close it up as well. So starting from the top, you're going to offer it up like that. Make sure that it sits nice and flush. And then you can push up like that at the bottom. And then everything goes back in very nicely. Put the bottom screws in and secure those with your pentalobe screwdriver. Wipe away all the dust because this is disgustingly filthy. That just about completes the repair. You can see it's a nice chassis, this one. It's good quality, it's good condition. The back is very good condition. The camera areas is a good other good place to look, and then obviously the edges. This is actually a really good This one is done, good to go. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.